The rain came down in sheets, turning the cracked pavement of the bus stop into a mirror of the gray sky above. Ethan Carter, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart too big for his own good, stood under the flimsy shelter, his work boots soaked through. His shift at the garage had ended hours ago, but the bus was late again, and the cold seeped into his bones. He wasn't one to complain, though. Life had taught him to take things as they came, to fix what he could and let the rest go. At 32, Ethan had seen enough of the world to know it wasn't always kind, but he still believed in leaving it a little better than he found it. Across the street, a figure caught his eye, a woman, sitting on a bench in the downpour, her white dress clinging to her like a second skin. The dress was unmistakable, even from a distance, a wedding gown, now ruined by the rain, its lace hem dragging in a puddle. She sat motionless, a small suitcase beside her, her head bowed, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. Ethan squinted through the rain, his curiosity piqued. Who sits in a wedding dress at a bus stop in the middle of a storm? He glanced at his watch, then back at her. The bus could wait. He crossed the street, his boots splashing through puddles, and approached cautiously. "Hey, you okay?" he called out, his voice soft but clear over the patter of rain. The woman didn't look up. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, a thin silver band glinting on her finger. Ethan hesitated, then crouched down to her level, keeping a respectful distance. "It's pouring out here. You'll catch your death." She finally raised her head, and Ethan's breath caught. Her eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, held a kind of sorrow that made his chest ache. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a face that might have been radiant under different circumstances. Now, she looked like someone who'd had every ounce of hope wrung out of her. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely audible, trembling with either cold or something deeper. "Just waiting. For the bus." Ethan asked, glancing at the empty road. "It's late. Might not come for a while." She didn't respond, just stared at the suitcase by her feet. Ethan noticed it was monogrammed, LM, and scuffed, like it had been dragged through hell before landing here. He straightened up, running a hand through his damp hair. He wasn't one to pry, but something about her tugged at him, a quiet pull he couldn't ignore. "Look, there's a diner just down the block. Warm, dry, decent coffee. You want to wait there instead?" Her gaze flickered to him, wary but not hostile. "I don't have any money," she said, almost a whisper, like it cost her something to admit it. Ethan shrugged, offering a small smile. "My treat. Come on." He didn't wait for her to agree, just picked up her suitcase, light as a feather, like it held nothing but ghosts, and started walking. After a moment, she followed, her soggy dress trailing behind her like a broken dream. The diner was a relic of small-town America, all chrome and neon, with a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. Ethan held the door open, and the woman slipped inside, leaving a trail of rainwater on the checkered floor. The waitress, a no-nonsense woman named that who'd seen it all, raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Ethan led the stranger to a booth by the window, setting her suitcase down gently. "Coffee?" he asked. She nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "Please." Dot brought 2 mugs and a pot of coffee, her gaze lingering on the woman's dress. "Rough day, hon?" she asked, not unkindly. The woman's lips twitched, but no smile came. "You could say that." Ethan didn't push. He sipped his coffee, letting the silence settle, giving her space to breathe. Outside, the rain kept falling, blurring the world beyond the glass. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "My name's Lila Monroe." "Ethan Carter," he said, extending a hand. She shook it, her fingers cold and trembling. "You don't have to tell me anything, Lila. But if you want to, I'm here." She looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was searching for a catch. Finding none, she exhaled, and the story spilled out in fragments. She'd been set to marry today, in a little church just outside town. Her fiancé, a man she'd loved since high school, had seemed perfect, charming, ambitious, the kind of guy everyone said was a catch. But this morning, as she stood in her dress, ready to walk down the aisle, he'd called it off. No explanation, just a text. Asterisk, "I can't do this." "I'm sorry." Asterisk, her family, embarrassed, had turned cold. Her mother had told her to leave, to figure it out, on her own. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, she'd ended up at the bus stop, her savings drained on a wedding that never happened. Ethan listened, his jaw tightening as she spoke. He'd seen his share of heartbreak, his own parents' messy divorce, his sister's struggle to escape an abusive ex. But Lila's story hit like a punch. To be left like that, abandoned on what should have been the happiest day of her life, was a cruelty he couldn't fathom. "That's rough," he said when she finished, his voice quiet but firm. "You didn't deserve that." Lila shrugged, staring into her coffee. "Maybe I did. Maybe I wasn't enough." "Don't," Ethan said, sharper than he meant to. "Don't let him make you think that. He's the one who wasn't enough." She blinked, startled by his conviction, and for the first time, a faint spark flickered in her eyes. They sat in silence again, but it was different now, less heavy, like a bridge had been built, however small. Dot refilled their cups, tossing Ethan a knowing look. He ignored it, focusing on Lila. "You got a place to stay tonight?" he asked. She shook her head. "I was going to take the bus to, I don't know, somewhere." Ethan nodded, thinking. His apartment wasn't much, a one-bedroom above the garage where he worked, but it was dry and safe. "I've got a couch," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's yours if you need it. Just for tonight, till you figure things out." Lila's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "I can't. I don't even know you." "Fair enough," Ethan said, leaning back. "But I'm not leaving you out in the rain. If you don't want my place, I'll help you find somewhere else." "Deal." She studied him, her guard still up but softening. Finally, she nodded. "Deal." They left the diner as the rain slowed to a drizzle, and Ethan drove her to his apartment in his beat-up pickup truck. The cab smelled of motor oil and old leather, but Lila didn't seem to mind. She clutched her suitcase, staring out the window as the small town of Willow Creek passed by. Hardware stores, a church, a bar with a flickering sign. Ethan kept the radio off, sensing she needed quiet. His apartment was as modest as he'd warned, with mismatched furniture and a sink full of dishes he hadn't gotten to. He set her suitcase by the couch, tossing a clean blanket over it. "Bathroom's down the hall. Towels are clean. I'll be in my room if you need anything." Lila hesitated, then said, "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Ethan scratched the back of his neck, a habit when he was searching for words. "I don't know. Guess I just know what it's like to feel like you've got nowhere to go. Someone helped me once. Figured I'd pay it forward." She didn't press further, just nodded and sank onto the couch, still in her damp dress. Ethan retreated to his room, leaving the door cracked in case she needed him. Sleep didn't come easy that night. He kept thinking about her, about the kind of pain that could leave someone so lost. He didn't know her story beyond what she'd shared, but he knew enough to want to help her find her way. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee. Lila was in the kitchen, her dress swapped for one of his old flannel shirts and a pair of sweatpants she'd found in his dryer. She looked different, still fragile, but less like she might break. "Hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "I needed something to do." "Mind? You're saving me from instant," Ethan said, grinning. They ate breakfast, cereal, because it was all he had, and talked. Not about her wedding, but about small things, her love of old jazz records, his habit of fixing cars for free when neighbors couldn't pay. It was easy, like they'd known each other longer than a day. Over the next week, Lila stayed. Ethan didn't push her to leave, and she didn't seem ready to. She started helping out at the garage, organizing tools and answering phones when his boss, Ray, was swamped. She had a knack for it, a quiet efficiency that impressed even Ray, who wasn't easily impressed. Ethan watched her come alive, bit by bit, her laughter sneaking out when he told a bad joke or when Ray's dog, Rusty, stole her lunch. But Willow Creek was small, and gossip traveled fast. Word spread about the mechanic who'd taken in a runaway bride, and the stories grew wilder with each telling. Some said Ethan was a saint. Others whispered he was taking advantage. Lila heard the whispers too, and one evening, as they sat on his tiny balcony overlooking the town, she brought it up. "People are talking," she said, her voice tight. "They think I don't know, a charity case. Or worse." "Let him talk," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "They don't know you. Or me. But it bothers me," she admitted. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly. "You're helping at the garage, you're pulling your weight. And even if you weren't, I'd still want you here." Her eyes searched his, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a warmth, a possibility. but neither acted on it. Lila was still healing, and Ethan wasn't one to rush. Days turned into weeks, and Lila started to rebuild. She got a part-time job at the diner, thanks to Dot, and saved enough to rent a room at a boarding house nearby. Ethan helped her move, though he felt a pang when she left. The apartment felt emptier without her, but he was proud of her strength, the way she'd clawed her way back from despair. Then came the day that changed everything. Ethan was under a car at the garage when Ray called him over, his face grim. "You hear about the fire?" Ray asked. Ethan shook his head, wiping his hands on a rag. Ray explained. The boarding house where Lila lived had caught fire that morning. Faulty wiring, they said. No one was hurt, but the place was gutted. Lila had lost everything, again. Ethan found her at the diner, sitting in the same booth where they'd first talked. Her eyes were dry this time, but her hands shook as she clutched a coffee mug. "I'm cursed," she said, half laughing, half crying. "Every time I think I'm getting somewhere, it falls apart." "You're not cursed," Ethan said, sliding into the booth across from her. "You're just going through it. But you're not alone this time." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Why do you keep helping me, Ethan? You don't owe me anything." He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Because you're worth helping. Because I've seen you fight, and I know you're stronger than you think. And because," he hesitated, then pushed on, "because I care about you." The words hung in the air, raw and real. Lila's breath caught, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached across the table, her hand finding his. "I care about you too," she whispered. That night, Ethan did something no one expected, not even himself. He went to Ray, who owned half the properties in town, and asked for a favor. Ray, gruff but soft-hearted, agreed. By the next morning, Ethan had secured a small apartment above the garage for Lila, rent-free until she was back on her feet. But that wasn't the shocking part. The real surprise came a week later, when the town gathered for its annual charity auction. Ethan, who'd always stayed in the background, took the stage. He'd spent every spare dollar he had, and some he didn't, to buy supplies and rally the garage crew. In front of everyone, he announced a plan. The garage would offer free repairs to anyone hit by the fire, starting with Lila's neighbors. He'd also set up a fund, seeded with his own savings, to help them rebuild. The crowd was stunned. Ethan Carter, the quiet mechanic who never asked for anything, had become their hero. Lila watched from the sidelines, tears in her eyes. When Ethan stepped off the stage, she threw her arms around him, not caring who saw. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I wanted to," he replied, his voice thick. "For you. For them. For all of us." The story of Ethan and Lila spread beyond Willow Creek, carried by local papers, and whispered on social media. People called it a miracle, a reminder of what kindness could do. But for Ethan, it was simpler than that. It was about seeing someone in the rain and refusing to walk away. And for Lila, it was about finding hope in a stranger's eyes and the courage to start again. Years later, when they stood together in that same church, not as bride and groom, but as partners in a life they'd built, they'd laugh about that rainy night at the bus stop. It wasn't the end of their story, but the beginning, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness to change everything.